This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment. All names, characters, and events are fictional. It does not depict any real people, real military actions, or real institutions. I remember the exact moment the air inside the hall shifted as if someone had quietly opened a door to a different world. Naval Station Norfolk was warm that June morning, and the promotion ceremony had drawn more people than I expected. Rows of uniforms gleamed under the lights, and every seat carried the low hum of whispered pride. I felt the weight of my dress blues settle across my shoulders as I stepped forward toward the podium. My palms were steady. My breath was steady. After 14 years in the Navy, I had learned how to steady anything until I heard his voice. My father, Richard Monroe, rose from his seat with a scraping sound that cut straight through the ceremony. He stood near the center aisle, and his face was red in a way I recognized from childhood arguments. Before I could breathe, he spoke loudly enough that every conversation in the hall fell silent. She made up her Navy years. This promotion is built on lies. For a second, I wondered if the room had tilted. My legs felt weightless and anchored at the same time. Officers turned. Sailors exchanged uncertain glances. The commanding officer froze mid-movement as if he had been caught inside a photograph. A murmur spread across the hall, and I felt dozens of eyes land on me. Betrayal does not always arrive with violence. Sometimes it arrives with a single sentence spoken by someone who should have protected you. I was aware of my heartbeat, but nothing else. I tried to form a word, a question, anything, but my throat felt sealed shut. My father kept talking louder now, as if he wanted the walls to remember this moment. She never deployed. She never earned a single thing she claims. Ask her. Ask her to prove it. His voice echoed across the ceremony that was supposed to mark one of the proudest moments of my life. I saw the confusion on the faces of sailors who had worked with me for years. I saw sympathy, doubt, shock. The humiliation hit me in waves, and each one left a colder ache behind. The commanding officer opened his mouth perhaps to regain control of the room, but he did not get the chance. A deep, steady voice rose from the back of the hall. Enough! The word carried a force that settled the entire room into stillness. The rows of sailors shifted as a tall man stepped forward. He moved with the unmistakable posture of someone shaped by many years of discipline. When he reached the center aisle, the lights caught his face, and I recognized him even before the ribbons on his chest confirmed it. Master Chief David Rourke, someone I had not seen in nearly a decade, someone who did not appear anywhere near ceremonies unless there was a reason. He walked past my father without looking at him and fixed his calm, penetrating gaze on the stage. I served with her. His voice was low, but it carried across every seat. And it is time the truth is heard. The entire hall went silent, then silent, in the way storms sometimes pause before they break. My breath returned in a shaky pull as the reality of what was unfolding settled inside me. A public accusation, a public defense, and a truth that was about to reshape everything. Have you ever had someone publicly question your integrity? Tell me which city you are watching from. I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, in a neighborhood where most families worked with their hands and lived by routines that rarely changed. People got up early, hauled themselves through long shifts, and came home tired but steady. In houses like ours, pride was measured in how hard a person worked and how little they complained. My father, Richard Monroe, fit that mold perfectly, at least on the surface. He ran a small repair shop off Franklin Road, and he wore the same expression every day, a tight jaw, a distant stare, and a kind of simmering frustration that never fully cooled. To outsiders, he looked dependable, but inside our home, he was a man shaped by old ideas and quiet disappointments. I learned early that he valued loudness, confidence, and certainty, traits he seemed to think belonged naturally to men. My older brother Tyler inherited all three in excess. When he walked into a room, he took up space in a way my father admired. When he made mistakes, they were brushed aside as lessons for growing boys. When he raised his voice, Dad called it strength. When I spoke softly, Dad called it weakness. I was smaller, quieter, and more observant than either of them. I loved reading maps and old magazines Mom kept under the coffee table. I loved taking apart little electronic toys to see how the insides worked. But nothing about me fit what my father believed a child should be, especially a daughter. He believed girls should not talk too much, or question too much, or dream too much beyond the familiar borders of our town. Every time I reached for something bigger, he found a way to press those dreams back down. My mother, Elaine Monroe, was the only soft corner in that house. She worked part-time at the local grocery store and still managed to make the house feel warm whenever she was home. She taught me small things, courage in quiet decisions, kindness that did not need to be loud, and the strength of keeping promises. She made me feel seen in a place where invisibility had become routine. When Dad criticized something I did, she would cut a gentle look toward me, one that said she knew I had tried. When he barked an order, she would lighten it with a smile. When he grew frustrated, she placed herself between us, not defiantly, but with a kind of practiced grace, as if she had been doing it her whole life. I clung to her without realizing how much of my world was built on her presence. The tension in the house was not always loud. It lived in the way my father sighed when I entered the room or the way he dismissed my achievements as luck. Sometimes it came through in a slammed hand on the table when he was displeased, or in the sudden shift in his posture when he felt challenged. He never hurt me, not physically, but he carved at my confidence with 1,000 small cuts. Comments like, "You will never handle real responsibility," or "You are too soft for anything difficult," became the soundtrack of my teenage years. When I was 16, he found me sitting on the porch steps with a brochure from a community college. Instead of asking why I was interested, he snatched it away and tossed it onto the table inside, saying, "You need to stop looking at things that will never happen." I remember the sound of his hand hitting the table beside the brochure, not violent but sharp enough to send a message. I learned to fold hope quietly so he could not step on it. My mother tried to encourage me, but she grew tired more easily as the years went on. The winter I turned 20, she collapsed in the kitchen one morning. The hospital said it was complications from a heart condition she had kept hidden from us. She passed away 2 days later. Losing her felt like losing the only voice in the house that believed I could be more than invisible. When we returned home after the funeral, the walls seemed colder. My father walked through the rooms like someone had stolen a piece of him, but instead of grieving, he hardened. Without her to soften him, his edges became sharper. Conversations became shorter. Expectations became heavier. Silence became heavier than any words he spoke. Tyler spent more time at the shop with Dad and soon picked up his habits, his tone, his dismissiveness. He mimicked the way Dad raised an eyebrow whenever I suggested something or questioned something. Before long, both of them looked at me as if I had somehow become the unreasonable one. I tried to stay out of their way, but in that house, even small movements felt like intrusions. I cooked dinner most nights because they expected it and because silence at the table was easier when I kept my head down. I cleaned because it avoided complaints. I disappeared into my room whenever I could. The house that once had my mother's laughter in it now echoed with the weight of everything unsaid. That year, I realized something that would shape the entire course of my life. I could not grow in that house. I could not breathe in that house. And if I stayed, I would disappear completely. The Navy had never crossed my mind back then, not until a recruiter visited my community college class and spoke about opportunity travel and discipline, words that lit sparks inside me. I kept the brochure hidden under my mattress as if it were contraband. Every night I took it out and whispered the same question to myself. What if I left? What if I could build a life where my voice did not need permission to exist? The answer terrified me, but staying terrified me more. Have you ever felt like nothing you did was ever enough for your own family? I was 18 when the decision stopped being a quiet whisper and became something solid enough to stand on. By then, the house in Roanoke no longer felt like a place to grow, but a place where every dream shrank to fit the walls. My mother had been gone a year, and the grief in the house had calcified into something sharp and controlling. My father demanded more from me than I could ever offer, and no matter how much I did, it was never enough. Every morning I woke to the same routine, the same weight, the same reminder that the life unfolding around me was not the life I wanted. When a Navy recruiter visited my community college, I had planned to ignore the presentation. I assumed it was meant for people stronger than me, louder than me, more certain than me. But something in his voice caught my attention, a steadiness that reminded me of what my mother used to say: strength is not always loud. He talked about structure and purpose and the pride of being part of something larger than yourself. He said the Navy offered a chance to rewrite your story. Those words stayed with me the entire night. I sat at the small desk in my room, staring at the brochure until the blue cover felt burned into my hands. I imagined myself stepping beyond the borders of Roanoke, imagined a life where no one dismissed me before I even tried. For the first time, the world felt larger than the expectations my father placed on my shoulders. When I finally told him the next morning, his chair barely creaked as he leaned back and gave a short, humorless laugh. "You Navy," he said, as if the idea itself were a joke. "You will quit in a week. You cannot handle hard things, Cassandra. You never could." He said it casually, as if stating a fact. But something in me rebelled. His disbelief did not crush me the way it used to. It sparked me. I filled out the paperwork that afternoon and scheduled my processing appointment. When the enlistment officer handed me the date for my departure to Great Lakes, I felt something I had not felt in years, hope that stood tall instead of shrinking. Leaving home was not dramatic. I stood in the driveway with a single duffel bag while my father watched from the porch with folded arms. Tyler was not there. He claimed he forgot I was leaving. My father did not offer a hug or a farewell. He just gave a single nod and said, "Don't expect this to fix anything." I did not answer. Some things no longer needed explanations. The bus ride to Great Lakes was long and quiet. I watched the landscape shift from the mountains of Virginia to the wide, flat stretches that marked the Midwest. When we finally pulled into the training command, the air smelled like cold metal and lake wind. Recruits stood in uneven lines, and a petty officer shouted instructions before half of us even knew where to go. The chaos was overwhelming. I felt small and out of place. But I also felt something else, a sense that whatever happened next would no longer be controlled by my father's disappointment. The first days of boot camp were some of the hardest of my life. We were woken before sunrise by shouting that tore through sleep like a blade. Sleep became a luxury food, became fuel, and mistakes became lessons delivered fast and loud. I struggled. Everyone struggled. Every time I felt myself falter, I heard my father's voice in my mind telling me I would quit. But I did not quit. I learned to breathe through the burn in my muscles. I learned to move with the division instead of hiding behind others. I learned that my quiet nature was not a weakness here. It helped me listen. It helped me focus. It helped me adapt. I made my first friend in the laundry room, a girl from Arizona named Kayla, who whispered to me that she cried in the shower so no one would see. I admitted I had done the same. She laughed softly and said, "Then we are going to make it." We pushed each other through the hardest drills. We studied together at night until the lights went out. And slowly, the routine that once felt impossible became something I could carry. During one inspection, a chief petty officer paused in front of me longer than usual. He looked at my rack, then at my uniform, then at me. "You are steady," he said. "You do not panic. Keep that." It was the first time in my life an authority figure had called steadiness a strength. I felt the words settle into me like they belonged there all along. By the time graduation approached, I no longer recognized the girl who walked onto the base that first day. My posture was different. My voice carried differently. I had learned to make decisions instead of apologizing for existing. On graduation morning, I stood in formation with my division while families filled the seats behind us. Some recruits waved discreetly. Some searched the crowd for familiar faces. I did not look for my father. I already knew he was not there. He had not even asked for the date. But I did not need his approval. When the commanding officer called my name for a special recognition for consistency and improvement, I felt something break free inside me, a belief that had been buried for years. I was not weak. I was not fragile. I was not defined by the narrow expectations of a house too small for my dreams. I had proved my father wrong without needing to say a word. I proved something to myself, too, that the world was wider than the one he tried to contain me in, and I belonged in it. My first set of orders sent me to Naval Station San Diego in early 2011, and stepping onto that base felt like opening the first real chapter of the life I had chosen for myself. The air smelled like jet fuel and salt, and the sound of aircraft moving across the flight line felt like a rhythm I wanted to learn. I checked into my new command as an aviation electronics technician, and the responsibility hit me fast. ATs handled the systems that kept aircraft communicating, navigating, and responding to the world around them. One mistake could ground an aircraft or worse, put a crew in danger. It was exactly the kind of challenge I had never been trusted with at home, which made me lean into it even harder. The work was demanding, but it felt right. I spent long hours learning the guts of the system's wiring harnesses, signal flow, troubleshooting logic, RF theory. None of it came easy at first. I messed up more than once misreading schematics or freezing during an unexpected test failure. But every mistake became something I studied until I understood it from the inside out. There was a strange kind of peace in the way the work required absolute focus. Circuits did not judge. Systems did not belittle you. They simply told the truth and asked you to understand it. That was something I had never experienced before. Late in 2011, our shop received a directive that a small group of technicians would support a program assisting naval special warfare aircraft with upgraded avionics. It sounded intense and far above my level, but my lead petty officer said I had the steadiness for it. I did not fully understand what that meant until the day Master Chief David Rourke walked into our hangar. You could tell immediately he was different. He moved like someone who had spent his life in dangerous places yet carried no need to prove anything. His presence was quiet but commanding the way storms sometimes build without noise. His uniform bore ribbons and insignia that hinted at decades of experience inside a world most sailors never touched. The first time he spoke to me, he simply asked for the status of a component I was repairing. I expected him to question my process or doubt my abilities the way my father always did. Instead, he listened closely, nodded once, and said, "Good. You observe before you move." That caught me off guard because it was not something many people recognized in me. Most thought quiet meant unsure. He saw something different. Over the next months, our team worked with his unit on and off supporting upgrades, testing equipment, and making sure everything worked reliably for missions we were never fully briefed on. We learned early not to ask for details. Special warfare had its own world, and our job was not to understand it, but to make sure the tools they relied on did not fail. Master Chief Rourke was present often, and though he never wasted words, each one carried weight. He did not hand out praise easily, which made the rare moments he acknowledged my work mean more than he probably realized. Once, after a long night troubleshooting a system that kept failing intermittently, he walked up behind me as I traced a wiring issue with a multimeter. Most people would hover impatiently or rush the process. He simply stood there waiting until I isolated the problem. When I finally found the short and looked up, he said, "You are methodical. Quiet professionals are rare. Keep that." The phrase quiet professional stayed with me. It was the first time someone described my quietness as a strength rather than a flaw. He had seen something my father never cared to look for, and recognizing it changed the way I viewed myself. As the years passed, I became more confident in my role. I qualified on more systems, earned additional responsibilities, and learned how to train junior sailors with the patience I wished someone had offered me earlier in life. At night, after long shifts, I often stood outside near the water listening to the sounds of the base and thinking about how far I had come since leaving Roanoke. Here, people valued what I did not, how loudly I said it. Here, effort mattered more than ego. Here, my quietness did not make me small. Around 2013, our involvement with naval special warfare increased. Not constantly, but enough that our shop developed a working rhythm with their teams. Rourke was always the constant figure in that world. He never rushed, he never panicked, and he never treated me with the dismissiveness that had followed me my entire childhood. Instead, he seemed to test me in small, subtle ways, asking questions that forced me to think rather than guess. I later realized he was evaluating not just skill but character, strength without noise, precision without ego, integrity without the need for attention. These were values the Navy respected deeply, and values my father had always mistaken for weakness. That contrast became a quiet fuel inside me. I worked harder. I volunteered for the toughest tasks, and slowly a reputation formed. She does not complain. She does not crumble. She does not cut corners. By 2015, I had achieved an expertise I never imagined possible. I became the person others came to when they were stuck. I became someone Rourke trusted enough to let handle sensitive diagnostics without standing over my shoulder. I had become someone my 18-year-old self would barely recognize, and though I did not know it then, my connection to Master Chief Rourke, the respect he had for my work, and the years we spent in parallel would eventually become the very thing that saved me when my own father tried to tear everything down in front of the entire Navy. It was a bond forged quietly across years, a bond my father would never understand, and a bond that would one day bring the truth crashing into a room where lies had been spoken too loudly. My mother's death in 2012 carved a fault line through my life that I did not fully understand until years later. I was stationed in San Diego at the time and had just finished a long maintenance cycle when the call came from my aunt. Her voice shook when she said the words, "Your mother collapsed this morning, and though the doctors tried everything, she passed away an hour ago." For a moment, the world around me blurred. The sounds of the hangar, the tools, the chatter of sailors all faded until there was nothing but the rushing in my ears. I requested emergency leave immediately, and my chain of command approved it without hesitation. The flight home felt endless. By the time I walked into the church where they held the service, the sight of her framed photo surrounded by flowers hit me like a force I could not prepare for. She looked peaceful in the picture, almost as if she were still alive, somewhere just slightly out of reach. My father, Richard, sat in the front row, stiff and silent, his jaw locked in that familiar expression of resentment that always simmered below the surface. Tyler sat beside him, shoulders squared, almost as if he were trying to mirror Dad's posture. When I approached, both of them stood, but not out of warmth. My father's eyes hardened the moment he saw me. "You should have been here," he said, not even lowering his voice for the sake of the room. "She needed you, and you were off playing sailor." The accusation landed with a sharpness that took my breath. I opened my mouth to explain that Mom had told me she was fine, that she never once hinted her condition had worsened, but Dad raised a hand, dismissing me before I could say a word. "You abandoned this family, Cassandra. And now look." His words wrapped around my grief like barbed wire. Tyler echoed him later at the burial site. "If you cared as much as you pretend to, maybe things would be different." It was as if they had decided grief needed a target, and I was the easiest one to aim at. The days after the funeral were even worse. While I tried to process the loss, replaying every conversation I had ever had with my mother searching for signs I might have missed, Dad seemed to feed off anger. He snapped at everyone, neighbors, relatives, even the pastor. But the worst of it came when we were alone in the house. Mom's presence had once softened every corner of that place, but now every room felt hollow and sharp. Dad walked through it like a storm, blowing open old resentments. He accused me of running from responsibility, of chasing a uniform, because I wanted to impress people, of choosing a career over family. None of it was true, but truth had never mattered to him when emotions took over. Tyler, who used to laugh more when Mom was alive, adopted every one of Dad's attitudes as if they were inheritance. He followed Dad around the house, repeating his opinions, echoing his harshness, and slowly transforming into a younger, sharper version of him. When I tried to talk to him, tried to understand what he was feeling, he shut me down with the same cold expression Dad used. "You left us, Cass. Do not expect sympathy." On my last night before returning to San Diego, I found myself sitting alone on the small porch where Mom and I used to talk. The regret was suffocating. I kept hearing Dad's words in a loop, "You should have been here." But grief does strange things to memory. It distorts responsibility, twists timelines, and steals clarity. I knew logically that I had not abandoned her, but logic and love rarely walk together. When I hugged Dad goodbye the next morning, he barely lifted his arms. When I hugged Tyler, he stood stiff as a fence post. I boarded the plane feeling as if I were leaving a burning building, but one in which no one wanted to escape. Back in San Diego, I threw myself into work because the silence of my barracks room was too loud. But grief has a way of following you into every space no matter how far you travel. The first voicemail from my father came a week later. His voice was cold. "You should know people here are talking. They say you could have done more. You should sit with that." A week after that, Tyler sent a text. Guess Navy didn't teach you how to be a daughter. Then the messages grew frequent. Criticism accusations, guilt reminders of every perceived failure I had ever made. None of them mentioned Mom with love only as a weapon. I stopped answering after a while because every reply stirred another round of attacks. Distance became a boundary I had never known how to set before. Months turned into a year, and the tone of their messages only hardened. Dad told relatives I had abandoned the family entirely. Tyler told people I did not come home because I could not face what I caused. Each lie traveled back to me through extended family or old neighbors who whispered their condolences or judgment, depending on which version they believed. The emotional weight pressed on me in ways I could not explain to anyone at the command. Some nights I sat in the barracks staring at my phone, unsure whether to delete their messages or reread them, hoping to find some sign of the father and brother I used to know. But those people were gone, swallowed by their own grief and bitterness. What hurt most was knowing my mother would never have wanted any of this. She would have wanted healing. She would have wanted us to stay connected. She would have wanted Dad to protect me, not tear me down in her name. But she was not there to mediate, to soften, to redirect his anger into something safer. Without her, the family foundation cracked beyond repair. In time, I stopped expecting warmth from them. I stopped hoping the next message would be different. Instead, I accepted a truth that brought both pain and clarity. Sometimes loss reveals what was broken long before. Sometimes death does not destroy a family, it simply exposes the fractures hidden beneath the surface. My grief for my mother remained pure, but the grief for my family became something else, a quiet resignation that the people I came from no longer saw me as one of their own. When the orders came sending me to Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam in 2016, I felt something close to relief. California had been good for me, but leaving the mainland offered a chance to breathe differently, a chance to step farther away from the poison slowly dripping from the relationship with my father and brother. By then, the messages from home had thinned, but never softened. Most were short, sharp reminders of everything they believed I had failed to be. I thought that putting an ocean between us might dilute their voices, but distance has a strange way of amplifying the echoes you have not yet dealt with. Pearl Harbor was beautiful in a way that made you forget for a moment that the world could be cruel. Blue water, wide sky, the hum of aircraft and ships moving with purpose. It reminded me daily why I had chosen this life. My new command assigned me to an aviation unit that handled maintenance for aircraft supporting Pacific operations. The work was demanding, precise, and unforgiving in a way that suited me. I found a rhythm again and built a new routine, studying systems after hours, volunteering for difficult troubleshooting cases, and gradually becoming someone people sought out, not because I was loud, but because I was reliable. Reliability in the Navy earns respect faster than charisma. During my first year there, I began sending money home. Not a lot, but enough that Dad would not have to worry about certain bills. I remembered how hard he had worked for decades, and even though he never treated me gently, I believed I owed something to the man who provided for us. At first, he accepted the money without comment. Then, he began adding small jabs into his rare messages. You think sending a few dollars makes up for everything. You are just avoiding real responsibility. When I called to check on him, he barely spoke. Sometimes he let the phone ring without answering. Sometimes he answered only to say he was too busy. It reminded me of knocking on a door that no longer had anyone behind it. I convinced myself that time would thaw him, but instead, his coldness became a habit he seemed proud of. Around 2017, I received my first major commendation for troubleshooting a long-standing avionics issue that had grounded an aircraft for weeks. The recognition meant the world to me not because of the award, but because of who delivered it. My division officer said you see problems before they become problems. That is rare. Hearing that felt like validation for every long night I had spent learning wiring diagrams by heart. I shared the news with my aunt because she had always been supportive. She congratulated me warmly, but her voice carried a hesitation. I finally asked if something was wrong, and she sighed before saying, "It is just your father he has been talking." I felt myself stiffen. Talking about what? She hesitated again, then said, "He tells people in town that Navy life is easy for girls because they can lie their way into anything." I stopped breathing for a moment. It was not the insult itself that stunned me, but the casual cruelty behind it, the way he stripped away years of hard work with a sentence. It said more about him than about me, but that did not make it hurt less. Over the next year, those whispers grew into something larger. Roanoke was not a big place. People shared stories the way some people shared recipes. I learned through scattered messages that my father had started telling others I exaggerated my role in the Navy, that I had never actually worked on anything important, that the military just gave out promotions to women to look good. My brother Tyler repeated those stories as if they were gospel. He sent a single text one night that simply read, "Dad says people are waking up to the truth." I deleted it immediately, but the words lingered like a bruise. It was not just pettiness. It was the beginning of something darker. For the first time in my life, I realized my father was not merely disappointed in me. He was threatened by me. My success contradicted the narrative he had built his life around, the belief that women were not meant for real responsibility, that daughters were meant to serve the family, not surpass it. My achievements challenged his worldview, and instead of adjusting, he rewrote the story in a way that diminished me. Accusations grow quietly at first, like mold hidden inside a wall. You do not see them until they begin to smell. In 2010, I found out through a childhood friend that Dad had begun hinting to neighbors that my records were probably fake. Fake. A word that carried the weight of dishonor in military culture. When she told me, I laughed outwardly, but inside, something buckled. I had dedicated nearly a decade to this career. I had endured long nights, painful failures, heavy pressure, and constant proof of competence. Yet back in my hometown, none of that mattered. In my father's version of the story I had built my life on, lies. The worst part was that I could not confront him. Confrontation with him never led to honesty, only escalation. So I stayed silent and hoped the whispers would fade with time. They did not. By 2010, I began hearing small fragments from extended family. Your father says you barely served. Your father says women get credit they do not earn. Your father says your job is easy. The repetition mattered. Lies do not need to be believable. They only need to be repeated often enough. Meanwhile, my career continued to rise. I took on leadership roles, mentoring younger sailors, guiding them through difficult tasks, helping them the way no one had helped me. Each recognition I received seemed to trigger a new wave of bitterness from home. The emotional contrast was impossible to ignore. In the Navy, I was respected. In my hometown, I was doubted. Around 2020, the shift inside my father became more obvious. He stopped responding to my calls entirely. When I sent money, he returned some of it with a note that read, "I do not want charity from someone who lies for advancement." The words cut deeper than the gesture. I realized then that he no longer saw me as his daughter, but as a threat to his pride. The accusations he spread were not impulsive. They were deliberate, a slow campaign to undermine everything I had built. And though I tried to ignore them, they began planting seeds of doubt in places I did not expect. Not doubt in myself, but doubt in what he would do next. I did not know then that those seeds were growing into the outburst that would one day explode at my promotion ceremony in front of an entire hall of sailors and commanders. I only knew that something in my father had shifted permanently, and that shift was building towards something I could not yet name. By 2023, I had spent nearly 13 years in the Navy, and the path toward Chief Petty Officer finally opened before me. Anyone in the Navy understands that becoming a chief is not a simple promotion. It is a transformation, a shift from being a technician or supervisor to becoming the backbone of the service, someone trusted to carry institutional knowledge and shape the next generation. It is an identity earned, not granted. When my chain of command told me that my record was competitive for E7, I felt both honored and terrified. I knew how much work it took to get there, the evaluations, the leadership roles, the sacrifices, the long, unglamorous hours. But what I did not know then was how deeply the news would shake a man living on the other side of the country. My father heard about my eligibility from someone in Roanoke who had stumbled across my name on a social media post celebrating our command. That simple piece of information reached him like a spark in dry grass. According to my aunt, he reacted instantly, explosively, pacing the living room, swearing under his breath, muttering that there must be some mistake. The idea of me reaching a rank he had never earned made something in him unravel. To understand that unraveling, you would have to go back to a piece of his past that he almost never spoke about. In 1985, when he was 19, he had tried to join the Navy. He passed the written tests but failed the medical screening due to a chronic heart murmur. It was not life-threatening, but it was enough to disqualify him from enlistment. He went home furious, ashamed, and convinced that fate had robbed him of the only chance he would ever have to be more than the men around him. Instead of letting the disappointment settle, he carried it like a wound that never healed. He built a story around it that the Navy had been his destiny and that losing it had set him on a smaller life. For decades, he told people variations of that same memory. If the Navy had taken me, things would be different. He said it so often that it became part of the family myth, a quiet explanation for his bitterness and ambition and the weight he placed on his children. He wanted Tyler to be everything he could not be, and he wanted me to stay small enough that I would never overshadow either of them. When I first enlisted, he brushed it off as a passing phase. When I survived boot camp, he said it was luck. When I completed my first deployment, he called it an accident. Every achievement I earned scratched at that old wound in him, the belief that he should have been the one to wear the uniform, that he should have been the one people respected. The more I grew into my career, the more that wound bled into his pride. So when he learned I was eligible for chief, it did not feel like progress to him. It felt like an insult, a cosmic theft, proof that the universe had favored the wrong Monroe. I learned the details later, but my aunt described the moment vividly. She said he slammed his hand on the kitchen table with enough force to rattle the salt shaker. She said he started muttering things that did not sound like him. She said he kept repeating a single sentence like a confession he could not control. She does not deserve it. She is not supposed to be the one. It was painful to hear, but not surprising. His entire worldview relied on hierarchy. Men above women, older above younger, loud above, quiet. But my career had grown outside that structure, and every step I climbed took me farther away from the role he assigned me. He felt it as a personal attack. My aunt told me he became obsessed with the idea that I must be lying to get ahead. That obsession eventually turned into the story he told everyone who would listen, that the Navy promoted women to look good, that my achievements were inflated, that my evaluations were fabricated. He never said these things to my face, only behind my back, because saying them to me would require confronting the possibility that he was wrong. Instead, he repeated them in diners and grocery store parking lots during casual conversations with neighbors who did not know any better. And people believed him because he spoke with certainty, the same certainty he used when he corrected me as a child. The jealousy did not come from a place of malice at first. It came from fear. Fear that his daughter had surpassed him. Fear that his life no longer stood as the authority he once believed it was. Fear that my success reflected his failures. With every qualification I earned, every leadership role, every commendation, he felt more displaced in his own narrative. My existence contradicted everything he told himself about the world. I had achieved the thing he wanted most, and because he could not accept that, he tore it down in the only way he knew how, by insisting it must be false. In the Navy, promotions are based on records, objective evaluations, deployment history recommendations. None of it can be faked. But my father did not live in the world of logic. He lived in the world of bruised pride. When the chief season officially began, I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. My mentors told me I had earned this. My peers congratulated me. Sailors I trained thanked me. But back in Roanoke, my father seethed. According to those who witnessed it, he developed a fixation on proving that my career was illegitimate. That fixation only grew the closer my pinning day came. By the time 2024 arrived, the jealousy had rotted into something toxic enough to travel across state lines and walk straight into the middle of my promotion ceremony. His fear and resentment had become a script he rehearsed so thoroughly that when the moment came, he did not hesitate to deliver it. Even if it meant humiliating me in front of an entire hall of sailors. Even if it meant betraying the only child who had ever tried to honor him. Even if it meant confirming the thing I had always feared, he valued his pride more than he valued me. The night before my promotion ceremony should have been the kind of night sailors dream about. A quiet pause before a turning point, a moment to breathe before stepping into a new chapter. Instead, I spent it staring at the ceiling of a hotel room in Norfolk, unable to quiet my mind long enough to sleep. The room was comfortable enough, a neutral beige space with soft lighting and the muffled hum of hallway air vents, but nothing about it felt restful. My uniform hung pressed and perfect in the closet ready for the morning, but even looking at it made my stomach tighten. Becoming a chief petty officer was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my life. Yet a knot of unease had been growing inside me for days, ever since I received a brief, unexpected message from my father. "I am driving down for the ceremony." That was all he wrote. No congratulations, no questions, nothing resembling pride. Just an announcement shaped like an intrusion. After years of distance, after years of cold messages and accusations, he suddenly decided to show up for the single most vulnerable moment of my career. I told myself it was harmless, maybe even an attempt to reconnect, but deep down, something felt off. My father was not a man who appeared without purpose. He arrived shortly after noon, checking into a cheaper hotel down the street, and insisted we meet briefly before the ceremony. We had not stood face to face in nearly 5 years. When I saw him in the hotel lobby, I felt a rush of old, conflicting emotions. He looked older than I remembered. Shoulders, more slumped hair, more gray lines deeper around his mouth. But the sharpness in his eyes, the one that always made me brace myself, was still there. For a moment, we just stared at each other, caught between the familiarity of blood and the distance of everything that had happened since Mom died. He finally stepped forward, giving a stiff nod. "You look different," he said. "Stronger, I guess." I thanked him, though his tone made it unclear whether it was meant as a compliment. We sat in the quiet corner of the hotel lobby, the noise of check-ins and rolling suitcases filling the awkward silence between us. He did not ask how I had been, or what my job was like now, or anything a father might ask after years apart. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and studied me like he was searching for cracks. "This whole chief thing," he began, letting the words hang. "I hear it is a pretty big deal." "It is," I said cautiously. 13 years worth of evaluations and recommendations and leadership work had brought me to this point, but I knew better than to expect him to understand the significance. He nodded as if confirming some hidden suspicion. "It will be interesting," he said slowly, "to see how you explain your service tomorrow." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean, explain?" He shrugged casually, but his eyes stayed fixed on me. "Just seems like a lot of weight to carry if things are not as solid as people think." A chill crawled up my spine. I asked him again what he meant, but he only smiled a thin, humorless smile that reminded me of countless childhood arguments. "You always worry too much, Cassandra. I am just saying tomorrow will tell us all a lot." He stood up before I could respond, dusted off his jacket, and said he needed to get dinner. He left without a hug or a goodbye, leaving me in the lobby trying to make sense of the cryptic warning. For the rest of the evening, his words echoed in my head, shifting shape each time I replayed them. How you explain your service. What was there to explain? My record was clean. My performance reviews were solid. My chain of command respected me. What could he possibly be hinting at? I wanted to believe I was overthinking, but the uneasy knot inside me tightened. This was the same man who had spent years belittling my career, the same man who had told people in Roanoke that women lied their way up the ranks, the same man who had accused me of abandoning my mother, even as she encouraged me to chase my future, the same man who could not bear the thought that I had succeeded where he had failed. Still, part of me hoped that his presence meant some small attempt at reconciliation. Maybe he regretted the years of distance. Maybe showing up for my ceremony was his way of acknowledging that. Maybe. I held on to that thought longer than I should have. Back in my room, I tried to rest, but sleep stayed far away. I replayed every conversation we had ever had about my career. Every dismissive remark, every accusation, every hint of envy. I wondered if his bitterness had finally burned itself out, or if it was still smoldering beneath the surface. Norfolk felt heavy that night, the air thick with summer humidity pressing against the windows. I walked to the small balcony and looked down at the quiet streetcars humming softly in the distance. Sailors were arriving at nearby hotels, laughing, talking, congratulating each other for making it this far. Their excitement made the silence of my room feel even more suffocating. I thought of calling someone a mentor, a friend, even Master Chief Rourke, whom I had not seen in years, but pride kept me quiet. I told myself I could handle anything my father threw at me. After all, I had been handling it since childhood. But nothing that night could prepare me for what would unfold the next morning. His final words lingered in my mind long after the lights were off. "It will be interesting to see how you explain your service tomorrow." I had no idea what he meant. I had no idea what he intended. All I knew was that by the next sunrise, I would understand his meaning far more painfully than I ever expected. The morning of the promotion ceremony felt unreal from the moment I woke up. My uniform looked sharper than it ever had pressed with deliberate care. The khakis immaculate, the anchors I would soon earn, resting in a velvet box I had placed beside the sink the night before. The hallway outside my hotel room buzzed with the low hum of sailors greeting each other, families exchanging quiet excitement, and the unmistakable electricity of a day that changes careers. I tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale felt thin. My father's strange warning from the previous evening tangled itself through every thought I had. Still, I forced myself to believe this day would be mine, not his. When I reached the hall on Naval Station Norfolk, the crowd took me by surprise. Rows of sailors, chiefs, mentors, family members, all filling the chairs beneath chandeliers that cast warm, gold light across a sea of uniforms. The stage was set with precision. Our command leadership stood near the podium reviewing the schedule, while other chiefs adjusted their covers and chatted in small groups. The air felt ceremonial, dignified, earned. I took my place in the front row with the other selectees waiting for our names to be called. For a moment, I felt something close to peace. This was the moment I had worked toward for 13 years. A petty officer third class who arrived scared and unsure had become someone entrusted with shaping sailors, guiding them, and carrying the weight of the Navy's traditions. I tried to hold on to that pride. Then I saw him. My father slipped into a seat in the middle of the hall, wearing an outdated suit and a face carved from tension. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply stared at me with an expression I could not read. The commanding officer stepped up to the podium and began the opening remarks, thanking families, acknowledging the significance of the chief mess, and highlighting the dedication behind each selection. I listened with half my attention because the other half was locked on the uneasiness creeping up my spine. When my name was called, "Cassandra Monroe, please stand." I rose on instinct, smoothing the front of my uniform and lifting my chin with quiet pride. Applause filled the room. A warmth spread through my chest. And then it happened. A scrape of a chair, a heavy breath, the unmistakable sound of someone rising with a purpose that did not belong in a room like this. My father stood. At first, I assumed he was simply emotional, maybe overwhelmed by the moment. But the look on his face was not pride or love. It was certainty. Dangerous certainty. The hall fell gradually silent as people turned toward him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried farther than I had ever heard it. "She made up her Navy years. This whole promotion is based on lies." The words struck with the force of a physical blow. My throat closed. My heart hammered against my ribs. I heard a few gasps, some muttered confusion, officers shifting uneasily. The commanding officer blinked, stunned, mid-sentence. The applause died instantly, leaving a silence so sharp it almost hummed. My father continued louder, each word dripping with rehearsed conviction. "She never did what she claims. She exaggerates everything. Ask her to prove a single deployment. Ask her to show her evaluations. She cannot. She has been lying for years." I could not move. I could not breathe. My entire career, my entire identity, everything I had built stood suddenly suspended in the air, waiting to be judged by the whispers growing around me. Sailors who trusted me looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes. Mentors stared with disbelief. A petty officer I had trained stared at the floor as if unsure what to believe. The humiliation radiated outward like heat. Every failure my father had ever predicted flooded back as if summoned by his voice. The commanding officer stepped forward, clearly preparing to shut the outburst down, but he never got the chance. A different presence moved from the back of the hall. Slow, deliberate, controlled. The shift in the room was immediate. Chairs straightened, conversations cut off. Even my father hesitated. I recognized the silhouette before I recognized the man. The broad shoulders, the unshakable calm, the steady gait of someone who had spent his life carrying authority without ever needing to raise his voice. Master Chief David Rourke. I had not seen him in nearly a decade, but the sight of him was unmistakable. He walked down the aisle, ignoring the dozens of eyes tracking him, and stopped directly between my father and the podium. The tension in the hall crystallized until even breathing seemed too loud. Rourke turned his head slightly toward my father, the movement minimal but commanding. "That is enough." His voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder across the hall. My father opened his mouth to speak again, but Rourke did not give him the space. He stepped forward, addressing the entire room with the authority of a man who had seen more than most people could fathom. "I have her evaluations." The sentence snapped through the silence. Every sailor in the room stilled, because evaluations are sacred beyond dispute. "I have her deployment logs." Murmurs rippled across the rows. "I know what she did for this Navy because I trained her." A full stop. A truth carved so cleanly it cut through every accusation. My father's face drained of color. His bravado faltered. The certainty he had carried like a weapon slipped from his posture. Rourke scanned the room, and every sailor, every chief, every officer seemed to lean forward instinctively, drawn toward the gravity of his words. Cass Monroe served with honor, dedication, and skill. I stand here as her instructor, her mentor, and her witness. The strangled silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that comes after an explosion when everyone is waiting to see what remains. I felt something inside me crack open. Relief, shock, grief, validation, a lifetime of being dismissed, suddenly colliding into a single impossible moment. The hall held its breath. My father stared at Rourke, unable to speak. And for the first time in my life, he had nothing left to say. When the ceremony finally ended, I barely remembered walking off the stage. Everything around me felt muted voices melting into a dull roar, lights blurring at the edges, uniforms moving in and out of focus. People approached me, offering quiet, supportive nods or brief words meant to steady me, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. My father's accusations had cracked something open deep inside me, and Master Chief Rourke's defense had sealed something else shut. Something permanent. By the time I stepped out into the parking lot, the humid Norfolk air hit my lungs with a heaviness that forced me to stop and breathe. I loosened my collar, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. The silence outside should have felt liberating after the suffocating stillness of the ceremony hall, but instead, it amplified every emotion flooding through me. Shame, anger, confusion, relief, fear, betrayal. The weight of it made my knees feel unsteady. I walked toward my car, trying to focus on the rhythm of my footsteps. I wanted space a moment to process what had just happened, but that possibility vanished the moment I heard his voice behind me. "Cass!" My father stood near the line of parked cars, hands shoved in his pockets, chin jutting forward in the defensive posture I had seen my entire childhood. His face carried the remnants of the confrontation inside the hall. Anger mixed with something else, something brittle and raw. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Cars passed in the distance, their tires humming along the asphalt. Seagulls cried overhead. A breeze moved through the lot, carrying the faint scent of the Elizabeth River. Then he sighed sharply as if the entire situation were somehow an inconvenience to him. "You did not have to make a scene." The absurdity of that sentence stunned me. I did not make a scene. You stood up and accused me of lying in front of my entire command. He shrugged a gesture that told me he was not here to apologize. "You pushed me to it. You and your lies. You made everyone believe you are something you are not." Something in me snapped then, not violently, but with a deep internal clarity. For years I had absorbed his words, his disappointment, his corrections, his belittling remarks, letting them settle in my chest until they felt like truth. But after what happened inside that hall, something shifted irreversibly. I no longer saw him as an authority. I saw him as a man refusing to face his own failures. "What lies?" I asked quietly. "Tell me clearly what lies you think I told." He looked away for a moment, jaw clenched. Then he said the words as if they had been burning a hole in him for decades. "You took the life that was supposed to be mine." I felt the ground steady beneath me because this was the core of everything. Every accusation, every rumor, every cold message. He was not trying to protect the Navy or expose wrongdoing or defend truth. He was protecting his ego. "You were supposed to stay here," he continued, voice rising. "You were supposed to help with the shop, support the family. But you left and you got everything I deserved, everything I should have had. You think I do not see how people look at you now? You stole the pride that belonged to me." My throat tightened, but not from guilt. From the painful realization that nothing I had ever done, nothing I had ever achieved, nothing I had endured had ever been seen clearly by him. He did not see my service, my long nights, my challenges, my deployments, my leadership. He saw only a reflection of his own unmet ambition. "Dad, I did not steal anything. I worked for everything I have." His face twisted. "You embarrassed me. You made me look small. You made this family look like fools. You becoming a chief." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "A chief. And what am I? A mistake. A failure. A nobody." There it was, the truth he had never allowed himself to say. The truth he had buried under anger for years. The truth that had poisoned every interaction between us. He was not angry at my success. He was terrified of what it revealed about him. I felt something settle inside me then, something steady and unshakable. "Dad," I said quietly, "you cannot blame me for your choices. You cannot expect me to shrink so you can feel tall." His eyes flashed with something between rage and heartbreak. "You do not understand what you have taken from me." I stepped closer, keeping my voice even. "I did not take anything from you. Your insecurity is not my burden to carry anymore." The words came out calm but firm, the kind of firmness that comes from years of being unheard. For the first time, he looked genuinely stunned. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked smaller suddenly, as if the weight of his bitterness had finally settled onto his shoulders instead of mine. After a long moment, he muttered, "You ungrateful girl," and turned away. But the insult slid off me like water. I finally saw him clearly, not as the towering figure of my childhood, but as a flawed, frightened man unable to reconcile his life with mine. He walked toward his car, shoulders hunched, steps uneven, as if he had aged years in minutes. I watched him go, feeling no satisfaction, no triumph, just a quiet grief for a relationship that had been dying for years. When he slammed his car door, the sound echoed through the parking lot, but it no longer carried power. When he drove away, the exhaust left a faint gray trail, but even that faded quickly in the open air. I stood still for a long time, letting the breeze move across my face, letting the knot in my chest slowly loosen. For the first time in my life, I felt the shift not just in my career, but in my identity. I was no longer the daughter bending under the weight of his expectations. I was a chief selectee, a sailor, a woman who had earned her place through effort, discipline, and resilience. And now I was someone who finally understood that I did not owe my father my silence or my suffering. I owed myself peace. The aftermath of the ceremony unfolded faster than I expected, and yet slowly enough for every detail to etch itself into my memory. Within 24 hours, the incident at Norfolk had become a subject of formal review, not because of anything I had done, but because of the conduct of my father, Richard Monroe, a civilian guest who had disrupted an official Navy promotion event. The administrative office contacted me politely, requesting a statement about what had happened, though they made it clear I was not under scrutiny. Their concern was the potential breach of ceremony protocol and the impact his accusations could have had on the integrity and decorum of the event. I wrote everything factually, leaving emotion out of it, though the words felt heavy on the page. My father stood up during the ceremony, interrupted the proceedings, and publicly accused me of falsifying my service record. I confirmed that Master Chief Rourke had intervened with documented proof supporting my record. The official who took my statement shook his head slowly as he read over it. "This is extremely serious," he murmured. "We cannot allow this kind of disruption to become precedent." Later that week, I learned the decision. My father would be prohibited from attending future Navy events involving active duty personnel, including ceremonies, promotions, retirements, and family invitations. It was not a legal punishment, but it was a firm one, and in the military community it carried weight. When the news reached Roanoke, it spread with the unsettling speed of small-town gossip. My father had always maintained a carefully curated image there, a hard-working old-school man known for blunt opinions and stubborn pride. People in Roanoke lived on routine stories and generational familiarity. When something broke that pattern, it rippled everywhere. Neighbors began to whisper. Some said they had always wondered why he never spoke proudly about my service. Others said he must have misunderstood everything because no father would humiliate his own daughter at a Navy ceremony. And then there were those who believed my father completely and assumed I had somehow manipulated the Navy for personal gain because small towns always have a few people who prefer scandal over truth. My father reacted as expected. Rage first, then silence, then denial, then an angry insistence that the Navy was exaggerating, that he had every right to question me because he was my father. But even the people who liked him began to distance themselves because publicly attacking your own child at a ceremony carried a stain that did not wash off easily. The most painful reaction, though, came from my brother Tyler. He called me with a sharpness that felt like a slap through the phone line. "What did you do?" His voice cracked at the edges. "Why is Dad getting talked about like some kind of monster around town? Why is everyone acting like we are some broken family?" I took a breath, steadying my voice. "Tyler, Dad did this to himself. He stood up in front of almost 200 sailors and accused me of making up my service. I did not embarrass him. He embarrassed me." Tyler scoffed a bitter sound. "You could have handled it quietly. You always make things bigger than they need to be. You always want people to feel sorry for you." The accusation hit a familiar bruised place inside me, but it no longer swallowed me whole the way it once would have. I stayed calm. I never asked anyone to feel sorry for me. I only defended myself when Dad tried to destroy my career. Tyler did not respond at first, and when he finally spoke, the words carried the weight of every resentment he had never admitted. "You made us all look weak. The town is talking about us like we are pathetic. You could have just let it go, but no, you had to turn it into a Navy-wide disaster." I felt my chest tighten, but not from guilt, from grief. Tyler was no longer speaking about the incident. He was speaking from years of living under our father's shadow, years of absorbing his worldview without ever questioning it. Tyler believed strength meant silence, that loyalty meant sacrificing truth, that family meant enduring humiliation if it protected an image. That had been our father's philosophy our entire childhood. Now Tyler had inherited it like a generational wound. I answered quietly, "If telling the truth makes you feel weak, that is not my responsibility. You want me to protect Dad's pride, even if it destroys my career. That is not loyalty, Tyler. That is surrender." He exhaled hard, almost a growl. "People see us differently now, like we are broken, like we cannot keep our own house in order." He paused, and his tone dropped to something almost accusing. "You should have thought about the family." That final sentence told me everything. In his mind, my service, my achievements, and even my dignity came second to preserving the illusion that our family was normal. I closed my eyes, letting the ache settle, but not consume me. "Tyler, if family means protecting lies, I do not want to be part of that definition anymore." Silence stretched long, thick, strained. Then Tyler muttered something under his breath, a mix of frustration and disbelief, and hung up. The click echoed in the quiet room, leaving behind a hollow ache that pulsed with old memories. The days that followed were strangely divided. Inside the Navy, I was supported, affirmed, protected by the truth. But back in Roanoke, a different narrative brewed, one shaped by pride, jealousy, tradition, and generational hurt. I learned quickly that vindication did not guarantee peace. It simply shifted the battlefield. What my father had done inside that ceremony hall created ripples across two worlds, my military life and my family legacy, and the consequences were no longer just his to bear. Have you ever felt your own family turn on you when you stood up for yourself? It happened 3 weeks after the ceremony, long enough that the storm should have quieted, yet soon enough that every emotion was still raw. I had just come off a long shift at the squadron office, and the sun at Naval Station Norfolk was sinking low, painting the flight line in deep gold. I was unlocking my car when I saw him, Richard Monroe, my father, standing near the curb with his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, like a man bracing against weather that did not exist. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world around us carried on, a distant rumble of aircraft, the metallic echo of tools inside a hangar, a few sailors laughing as they crossed the lot. But between us was a silence so thick it felt almost physical. He took one slow step forward, then another, his shoulders hunched, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking up to mine only to fall away again. "Cass," he said quietly, his voice stripped of the false authority he always carried. "I need to talk to you." I kept my hand on my car door. There was no rage in me, only caution and distance. Two things I had earned. "What do you want, Dad?" He swallowed hard, the way people do when they are preparing to say something that tastes bitter on the way up. "I did not mean to embarrass you. He hesitated, eyes glassy with the shame he could not disguise. "I just did not want to feel small." The words hung between us, fragile and painful, because at their core they were true, and yet they did nothing to repair the damage he had done. I said nothing, letting the weight of his confession settle. He rushed into the silence as if afraid I might walk away. "I thought if I questioned you first, I could stay in control. People always saw me as someone who never failed, someone who never came up short. And hearing them talk about you becoming a chief, it made something in my chest feel like it was caving in." His voice cracked then, and he cleared his throat quickly, pretending it had not happened. "I did not want to feel like the person everyone forgot, like the one who never mattered." He searched my face, desperate for something, a softness, a hint of forgiveness, a signal that his explanation might be enough. But I had spent 32 years shrinking around his insecurities, carving myself smaller so he could feel bigger. That era was over. I lifted my chin and met his eyes directly. "You chose to humiliate me, Dad. I choose to protect myself." The sentence hit him like a physical blow. His shoulders sagged and he blinked rapidly as if trying to clear the sting from his vision. "I am your father," he whispered, as if that title alone should shield him from consequences. "And that should have meant something," I replied, "but you used it as a weapon, not a responsibility. You hurt me publicly, repeatedly, and you expect forgiveness because now the consequences landed on you. That is not how healing works." He took in a shaky breath. "So is that it? You are just done with me?" I let out a long, slow breath, feeling the exhaustion of years settle into my bones. "I am not closing the door, Dad, but I am no longer carrying your shame. If you want forgiveness, start with honesty, not excuses." The words were steady, sharp, but not cruel. They were boundaries, something our family had never known how to create. He opened his mouth to argue, to justify, to twist my words into something that fit his worldview, but nothing came. Instead, his face crumpled in a rare, unguarded way. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, the proud, furious man of Roanoke stripped down to a vulnerable shape he did not know how to hold. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes flicking over my uniform as if realizing for the first time that I had built a life completely separate from him. One he could not control. One he could not diminish. One he had no power to define. "I thought you would understand," he murmured. "I thought you would see I was only protecting myself." I shook my head. "Protecting yourself does not mean destroying me." He flinched. The truth always lands harder than the lie. Finally, he stepped back, nodding faintly as if accepting a verdict he had never prepared to face. "I guess I messed this up beyond fixing," he said softly. "For now," I replied, "but fixing it is your job, not mine." He turned away, then walking toward the far edge of the parking lot with slow, uneven steps. The sinking sun cast his shadow long across the pavement, making him look both older and smaller than I ever remembered. When he reached his truck, he paused, hand on the door, as if waiting for me to call after him. I did not. He climbed in, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. As the taillights faded into the distance, I felt a strange combination of sadness, relief, and power settle through me. I had not wanted this confrontation. I had not wanted the break, but choosing myself had been long overdue. For the first time in my life, I understood that forgiveness was not owed. It was earned through honesty, through effort, through accountability, and he had offered none of those things yet. I stood there a moment longer, breathing in the evening air, letting the truth of the moment anchor itself inside me. My father had returned seeking comfort without growth, and I had refused to shrink so he could stand taller. That refusal was not cruelty, it was liberation. Have you ever had someone come back only when the consequences finally hit them? The invitation arrived in my inbox 2 weeks after my father's failed attempt to justify what he had done. It was from the Fleet and Family Support Center at Norfolk, asking if I would be willing to speak at a spouses and family support event focused on resilience and navigating difficult dynamics at home while serving in the Navy. At first, I hesitated. Sharing pieces of my personal life, especially the parts shaped by pain, was something I had never done willingly. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had spent over a decade absorbing shame that did not belong to me. Perhaps it was time to put the truth somewhere other than my own chest. So I said yes. The auditorium was smaller than the promotion hall, but filled with over 100 people. Spouses, sailors, civilian employees, even a chaplain sitting near the back. I stood at the podium in my khakis hands, steady voice prepared, but heart beating a little too fast. I did not plan to humiliate my father. I did not need to say his name. This was not about revenge that weaponized pain. It was about reclaiming the narrative that he had tried so hard to warp. I started with quiet honesty. Sometimes the hardest battles sailors face do not happen on deployment or inside command. They happen at home in the relationships meant to protect them. The room shifted slightly as people leaned in. I spoke about my childhood in Roanoke, the favoritism, the pressure, the emotional imbalance, the invisible rules carved into the walls of our house. I explained how joining the Navy had been my way of choosing life over confinement, purpose, over fear, identity, over silence. I told them that service had given me structure, discipline, and a sense of self that my upbringing never allowed me to hold. Then I reached the harder part, the part that made several people stop taking notes and look at me directly. I talked about what it feels like when the people closest to you cannot accept your growth, when love becomes conditional on staying small, when your accomplishments become a mirror that others refuse to look into. I described the internal conflict of wanting your family's pride while knowing that your success threatens their fragile sense of themselves. I never once said my father's name. I did not mention the public accusation, the humiliation, or the aftermath. I kept it universal, raw, but not exploitative. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air system. Then I said the sentence that felt like stepping into a brighter world. Sometimes protecting your mental health means accepting that certain people will never celebrate you, and sometimes the bravest act is choosing to keep going anyway. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. A young sailor nodded slowly like each word landed somewhere familiar. When I ended the talk, the applause was not loud but deep, the kind that comes from recognition rather than performance. Afterward, several people approached me privately. Some shared pieces of their own stories quietly, carefully, as if handing me fragile objects. A senior spouse thanked me for saying aloud what so many struggled to admit. A young sailor said he wished someone had told him years ago that distance from family did not equal disrespect. By the time I left the auditorium, I felt lighter, not because the pain disappeared, but because the truth had finally been spoken in a space that honored it. I did not realize what would come next. 3 days later, I received an email from the Regional Behavioral Health Office. Someone had forwarded a recording of my talk, and they wanted to invite me to speak during Navy Mental Health Week, a major annual event that focused on resilience leadership under stress and family impact on service members. The idea stunned me. Me, the girl from Roanoke, the daughter expected to stay silent, the sailor accused publicly by her own father. Now I was being asked to speak to hundreds of sailors across the region. I read the email 3 times before I finally let the meaning settle. My truth had traveled farther than my father's lies ever could. When the event arrived, I stood in a far larger auditorium. Screens displayed my name, rank, and topic. Sailors in uniform filled the seats. Officers stood in the back. Even a few chaplains and counselors attended. I spoke again, expanding on the themes of resilience and the weight of family expectations. I emphasized that strength did not always mean enduring misery. Sometimes it meant refusing to carry someone else's unresolved wounds. This time I mentioned the ceremony without details. I said that when someone publicly questions the integrity you have earned through years of service, it is not just a personal attack, it is a threat to your identity and your stability. I told them it took a community to remind me that one person's bitterness could not erase 14 years of dedication. When I stepped off stage, sailors lined up not for autographs or photos, but to tell me thank you. One petty officer said my words helped him understand his own father's resentment. A chief told me she had carried the same shame for years, thinking she was alone. A master-at-arms confessed he had been on the verge of leaving the Navy because of pressure from home. I walked out of that event realizing something profound. Revenge did not require cruelty. Justice did not require destruction. My father had tried to silence my service. I responded by amplifying my voice. He tried to shrink me. I grew in front of an entire community. He tried to make me feel small. Instead, he became the reason I stood taller. That was the moment I understood the power of naming the truth, not to punish, but to set a boundary so unmistakable it changed everything that followed. And the most ironic part, the Navy he tried to use against me became the very institution that elevated me. I did not expose him. I illuminated myself. That was enough. It was late September when Tyler showed up at my apartment, unannounced, a soft, hesitant knock that did not match the brother who had once barked demands through every doorway. I opened the door, expecting tension, expecting bitterness, expecting the same angry echo of our father. Instead, I found a man who looked older than his 35 years, eyes, shadowed shoulders, slumped hands clasped tightly in front of him like he was holding himself together. "Cass," he said quietly, "can we talk?" There was no accusation woven into the syllables, no defense, no edge, just a worn-out kind of vulnerability that made me step aside without a word. He walked in slowly, scanning the room like he expected memories to rise from the walls. I waited, giving him space, giving myself space too. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sat down on the couch, elbows on his knees, head hanging. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice rough. I stayed standing, unsure whether I was ready to sit beside him. He continued before I could respond. "I said terrible things to you. All my life I repeated whatever Dad said because it was easier than thinking for myself. I let him decide what the truth was. I let him decide who you were." He rubbed his palms together, a nervous childhood habit. "When he humiliated you at the ceremony and you still stood your ground, it was the first time I realized we had both been raised inside the same lie. I never questioned it. That was on me." I felt the knot in my chest loosen just a little, but I stayed quiet, letting him speak, letting him reach the point he had come for. Tyler swallowed hard, eyes red. "The town is talking," he said. "They are calling you the brave one, and they are calling Dad something else entirely. I thought I would be angry about that, but instead, I think they are right. You were the only one of us who ever stood up. You didn't just leave Roanoke, you broke out of it. And I hated you for it because it reminded me I never did." That admission cut deeper and gentler than I expected. People often think resentment comes from hate, but it usually comes from yearning. Tyler exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry, sis. Truly. I never protected you. I never supported you. I let Dad use you as a target for everything he felt about himself, and I joined him because it felt easier than choosing you." That was the moment something inside me cracked, not painfully, but in the way ice cracks right before it begins to melt. I sat down slowly, leaving space between us, but acknowledging the shift. "Thank you for saying that," I told him softly. "It does not undo everything, but it matters more than you know." Tyler nodded, eyes glassy, then wiped them quickly. "There is something else. It's about Dad." I felt my spine stiffen. "What now?" Tyler looked toward the window, almost ashamed. "He is not doing well. People in town won't talk to him the way they used to. Some avoid him. Some asked why he would do that to his own daughter. You know how much he cares about how he looks to everyone. This shook him worse than I realized. A twinge of sadness tugged at my chest, but not enough to erase the boundaries I had built. Is he getting help? I asked. Tyler shook his head. Counseling was offered. I even tried to talk to him about it. He refused everything. Says he is not broken and does not need anyone fixing him. Says the world turned against him. But mostly, he sits alone in the house. He does not come out much, does not see friends, barely talks, just sits there with his pride and his silence. I pictured it too clearly, the dim living room, the old recliner, the muted television, the smell of stale coffee. A man alone with the echo of his choices. It did not bring me satisfaction. It brought me a hollow ache, the kind reserved for wounds you finally accept will never fully heal. Tyler hesitated, then added softly, "He misses you, Cass. He will not say it, but he misses you. All the years he tried to control you, and now he does not know how to exist without the version of you he invented." I closed my eyes, taking in a slow breath. Missing someone does not erase the harm. Wanting comfort does not create accountability. Tyler watched me carefully. "Are you going to see him?" I shook my head gently. "Not now. Maybe not for a long time. Maybe never in the way he hopes. But I can send him something. A letter. Something that gives truth without reopening the wound." That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at a blank page for a long time. Then slowly I began to write. "Dad, healing is a choice. You have not chosen it. I cannot take responsibility for the pain you carry, and I will not shrink myself to soothe it. I hope one day you choose a different path, a healthier one. But that is yours to walk, not mine to guide. I am not closing the door, but I am stepping back from it. I will always want peace for you, but I will not sacrifice myself to deliver it." When I finished the letter, I folded it carefully, placed it in an envelope, and left it on my counter until morning when I mailed it with steady hands. After that, I did not return to Roanoke. I did not call. I did not ask for updates, but I also did not harden my heart. I let compassion sit beside distance, a balance I had never allowed myself before. For the first time in my life, I understood that letting go was not abandoning someone. It was choosing not to be pulled under by their unfinished battles. And as the weeks passed, I found myself breathing easier, moving lighter, and standing taller, not because my family was healed, but because I finally was. The day I officially pinned on Chief came quietly. Not with the chaos of a full command ceremony, but with a smaller gathering organized by the people who had truly stood by me. The Navy sometimes teaches you that rank is earned through exams and boards, but I had learned something deeper. Rank is also earned through resilience, through refusing to break even when someone tries to shatter the foundation you built. The pinning took place in a modest room at the command, decorated with only a few chairs, a small lectern, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting from a nearby table. I wore my service khakis pressed so sharply they almost felt like armor. My hands did not shake. My breath was steady. When Master Chief David Rourke walked in, I felt the room shift in a way that only happens when someone with true gravity enters. He approached me without ceremony, no dramatic pause, no speech, only that quiet, steady presence that had shaped so much of my early career. "I did not think I would miss another promotion," he murmured, and for the first time in a long time, something like joy warmed my chest. "You trained me for this," I said. He shook his head slightly. "You trained yourself. I just reminded you of what you were capable of." His words settled into me with a weight that was grounding, not heavy. As he placed the anchors on my collar, I felt something click inside me, not just pride, but peace, a sense that this moment had been carved from every hardship, every accusation, every doubt, every mile I had traveled away from the past. When the small gathering applauded, it felt sincere, not polite. These were people who saw me clearly, who judged me by my actions, not by my father's bitterness. After the ceremony, Chief Rourke clasped my shoulder. "You know, Chief," he said, drawing out the title intentionally. "You get to choose the world you build next. Make sure it is bigger than the one you came from." His words became the guiding thread for everything that followed. 3 months later, I received new orders, Naval Air Technical Training Center, Jacksonville, Florida. A role focused on mentoring junior sailors in aviation electronics, guiding the next generation through the same challenges that had once shaped me. The move felt like crossing a threshold into a life no longer defined by what I escaped, but by what I could create. Jacksonville was sunny, humid, and full of a gentleness I had not felt in years. The base buzzed with young sailors eager to prove themselves. Many of them reminded me of who I once was, a little scared, a little unsure, carrying stories they did not know how to share. I taught them technical skills, but more importantly, I taught them something the Navy curriculum never prints. Your past does not get to define your integrity. Your family does not get to choose your worth. You decide who you become, and slowly the words I gave them began to reshape me too. In mentoring them, I felt parts of myself being repaired, small cracks sealed not by forgetting what had happened, but by understanding that my identity no longer needed to orbit the pain others caused. Some evenings, I stayed late in the hangar listening to sailors talk about homes that hurt more than deployments. I shared pieces of my story when appropriate, never naming names, never reopening old wounds, only offering the truth that healing was possible even when it did not come packaged with reconciliation. A few months into the new assignment, I received a letter from Tyler. He wrote that Dad had received my message and read it more than once, but remained unchanged, trapped inside the same stubborn pride. The news saddened me, but it did not break me. Healing is a choice. He had not chosen it. And finally, I understood that this truth did not make me a bad daughter or a cold person. It made me someone who had learned to protect her own spirit. Life in Jacksonville gave me room to breathe. I found routines that felt grounding: morning runs along the water, teaching classes, walking past rows of aircraft glowing under the Florida sun. I made new friends, sailors and civilians, people who showed up not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. For the first time in years, I stopped bracing for the next emotional blow. I started trusting the quiet. One late afternoon, after a long training session, I walked down to the shoreline near the base. The sky stretched in soft gold and lavender, and the waves rolled in with a rhythm that felt like a steady heartbeat. I stood barefoot in the sand, letting the warm water wash over my feet, and realized something profound. Family is not the people who share your blood. Family is who shows up. Family is who defends you when the world caves in. Family is who sees you not through the lens of their insecurities, but through the truth of your character. I thought of Chief Rourke standing in that ceremony hall. I thought of the sailors who leaned in when I spoke at Mental Health Week. I thought of the young men and women in my classes who trusted me with their fears. That was my family now, not the one that tore me down, the one I built, the one that chose me. As the sun dipped lower, I whispered a simple vow to the waves. I will not build my life around the people who tried to break me. I will build it around the people who helped me rise. That was the closing chapter of a long, painful story and the opening page of one built on strength, peace, and integrity. Have you ever had to fight to protect your own honor? Comment the city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels.